The first snow of November settled over Briar Ridge Ranch like a quiet warning. It covered the worn fence posts, dusted the empty hay wagons, and softened the cracks in the old red barn, making everything appear stronger than it truly was. But Aloan Mercer knew appearances meant very little. She stood alone on the porch, the folded foreclosure notice pressed tightly inside her gloved hand. 3 months. That was all the bank had given her. 3 months to pay the overdue mortgage her late husband had struggled to keep current before pneumonia stole him away the previous spring. 3 months to save the ranch that had belonged to the Mercer family for nearly 70 years. Behind her, the front door creaked open. You've read that letter enough times to memorize it. Aloan turned and forced a smile. Tamsin stepped outside carrying 2 steaming cups of coffee. At 24, her eldest daughter possessed her father's steady eyes and practical mind. Since his passing, she'd quietly assumed responsibility for the ranch books without anyone asking. She handed her mother a mug. It won't change if you keep staring at it. No, Aloan answered softly. It won't. For several minutes, they stood together, watching the cattle search through the frosted pasture for patches of grass. The silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was familiar. Inside the house, laughter suddenly drifted through the open kitchen window. Linnea, only 21. She still possessed the remarkable ability to laugh even when life seemed determined to take everything away. She had spent the morning calming a frightened mare preparing to foal, talking to the horse as though they were lifelong friends. Aloan often wondered where her youngest daughter found such hope. I spoke with Mr. Hollister yesterday, Tamsin said quietly. The banker? She nodded. He says if we sell before January, someone will probably buy the property. Aloan's fingers tightened around her coffee cup. And if we don't, he doesn't think we'll have a choice. The words lingered between them like the cold wind sweeping across the valley. Just then Linnea burst through the front door carrying an old saddle blanket. You both look like someone canceled Christmas. She stopped after seeing the folded letter. Oh, neither woman answered. Linnea's smile slowly faded. She understood. That evening the 3 women gathered around the kitchen table beneath the warm glow of a single lantern. The supper was simple. Bean stew, cornbread, preserved peaches. No one complained. They had grown accustomed to making every meal stretch a little farther. After washing the dishes, Aloan walked toward the pantry. She paused outside the doorway when she heard her daughters talking quietly. We should sell. It was Tamsin speaking. Linnea answered almost immediately. Mother won't. She can't lose everything. And if she keeps trying to save the ranch, she might. Silence followed. Then Tamsin spoke again. I've been offered bookkeeping work in Cedar Bluff. Linnea looked up. You never told Mother. I wasn't going to. You'd leave? If it meant paying the debt. Yes. Linnea lowered her eyes. I've been thinking about taking horses to the military post for training work. So you've been planning to leave too. I'd come back. But we'd both be gone. Neither sister noticed their mother standing silently outside the pantry. Aloan quietly returned to her bedroom before either daughter could see the tears filling her eyes. She had spent 18 months trying to keep the family together. Now she realized both daughters were preparing to sacrifice their own futures simply to protect hers. That hurt more than any foreclosure notice ever could. The following afternoon, the first real winter storm rolled across the valley. Dark clouds gathered over the mountains while icy wind whipped through the cottonwoods lining the creek. Aloan hurried toward the barn just as an unfamiliar rider approached the front gate. His horse immediately caught her attention. A powerful smoke gray gelding moved with calm confidence despite the worsening weather. Its rider appeared equally composed. Tall, broad-shouldered, weathered from years beneath open skies. His dark coat carried dust from many miles of trail, and beneath the brim of his hat his quiet blue-gray eyes seemed to notice everything at once. He stopped several yards away rather than riding directly into the yard. Afternoon. His voice was low and respectful. I was hoping to water my horse. Aloan nodded toward the trough. Help yourself. He dismounted without another word. While the horse drank, the stranger slowly looked across the property. Not with judgment, with careful attention. He noticed the leaning fence near the north pasture, the sagging hay shed, the unused lower field, the cracked irrigation ditch. Finally he turned back. You're feeding hay too early. Aloan frowned. I beg your pardon. The north pasture still has enough winter grass. He pointed toward the ridge. If you rotate the herd tomorrow, you'll save nearly 3 weeks of hay. She folded her arms. You've been here less than 5 minutes. I know. And you're already telling me how to run my ranch. I'm trying to save it. The word surprised her. He continued calmly. The creek behind your barn still flows beneath the ice. Your cattle shelter faces the wrong direction for winter wind. And that hay loft is losing heat through broken roof planks. He wasn't criticizing. He was simply observing. You can tell all that from the yard? I've spent 20 years rebuilding ranches people thought were finished. She studied him carefully. What exactly do you want? He smiled faintly. Water. Nothing more. He climbed back into the saddle. My name's Gideon Ashcroft. Before riding away, he looked toward the ranch house. You've still got a chance. Then he disappeared into the falling snow. For reasons she couldn't explain, Aloan found herself thinking about the stranger all evening. Not because he'd spoken dramatically. Quite the opposite. He had spoken like a man who believed problems always had solutions. The next morning, before sunrise, hoofbeats echoed through the yard again. Tamsin looked through the window. The rider's back. Gideon removed his hat before approaching the porch. I hope I'm not intruding. Aloan opened the door. I thought you were passing through. I was. What changed? He glanced toward the weathered ranch. I couldn't stop thinking about this place. She waited. Finally he spoke. I have a proposition. Tamsin and Linnea quietly stepped into the hallway behind their mother. Gideon noticed them immediately. His expression softened. He realized they were adults, old enough to understand every word. He looked back at Aloan. I don't want wages. I don't want ownership. I don't want your land. She blinked. Then what do you want? He answered without hesitation. If you'll let me stay until spring, I'll save your ranch. The three women exchanged confused glances. Gideon continued. In return, he looked toward the daughters. Promise me they'll always have a place here. Aloan frowned. They already do. He nodded. Then we're halfway to an agreement. Silence settled over the porch. Snowflakes drifted slowly between them. Finally, Aloan asked the only question that mattered. Why would a stranger do this for people he's never met? For the first time, something deeply personal crossed Gideon's face. I've ridden past too many empty ranches. I've watched too many families lose everything because help arrived one season too late. He met her eyes steadily. I'm tired of arriving after the story ends. No one spoke. The wind carried snow across the yard. At last, Aloan extended her hand. If you're willing to work beside us, Briar Ridge Ranch welcomes you. Gideon removed his glove and shook her hand firmly. Neither of them realized it then. But the bargain made beneath that quiet November snowfall would rescue far more than weathered fences and struggling cattle. Before winter released its grip on the valley, it would rebuild four lonely hearts into one unbreakable family. Winter arrived with a vengeance. By the second week of November, Briar Ridge Ranch disappeared beneath a blanket of snow that reached halfway up the fence rails. Most ranchers in the valley believed this would be the season that finally finished Aloan Mercer's ranch. Instead, it became the season everything began to change. At sunrise, Gideon Ashcroft was already outside, a coil of rope over one shoulder and a notebook tucked beneath his arm. He never barked orders. He simply worked first. Before breakfast, he had already repaired a section of fencing using timber abandoned behind the barn instead of buying new lumber. By noon, he had redirected meltwater from a hillside into a neglected storage pond. By evening, he had convinced Tamsin to move nearly half the cattle into a different pasture. I thought this field was exhausted, she admitted. It is, Gideon replied. But the South Ridge isn't. She frowned. We've never wintered cattle there. That's because no one noticed the cedar trees blocking the northern wind. The next morning, the herd stood calmer than it had in weeks. Even the older ranch hands from neighboring properties wandered over to ask what had changed. Gideon merely smiled. The land usually tells you what it needs. Inside the ranch house, another transformation quietly unfolded. The dining table, once a place of hurried meals and worried silence, slowly became the center of every evening. Tamsin spread ledgers across its surface after supper. Linnea cleaned tack while humming softly beside the fire. Aloan mended coats beneath the lamplight. And Gideon, he sharpened tools, repaired harness buckles, or quietly answered questions whenever someone asked. Never once did he behave like the ranch belonged to him. One snowy evening, Tamsin slid a ledger toward him. I don't understand these cattle numbers. He studied the pages. Who kept these books before? My father. He was honest. She blinked. How can you tell? He counted every expense. He tapped another page. But he never counted opportunity. She leaned closer. What do you mean? You've been selling calves individually. That's how we've always done it. He nodded. What if neighboring ranches combined shipments? We'd have more buyers. And better prices. Her eyes widened. We've never thought about that. No. You've only been trying to survive. Now we need to think about growing. For the first time since her father's death, Tamsin became excited while looking at ranch accounts. Linnea found herself equally fascinated. Not by ledgers, by horses. One afternoon she struggled with a restless bay gelding recently purchased from a neighboring spread. The horse refused every command. Gideon watched quietly for nearly 10 minutes before speaking. He's frightened. Linnea sighed. He's stubborn. No. He expects disappointment. She looked at him curiously. What do you mean? He keeps waiting for someone to force him. Instead of grabbing the reins, Gideon simply stood beside the horse. Patiently. Silently. Nearly 5 minutes passed. Then the gelding lowered his head on his own. Linnea stared. I've never seen that. Gideon smiled. Most creatures respond better to trust than pressure. She laughed softly. You're talking about horses. He looked toward the ranch house where Aloan was hanging laundry despite the cold. Not only horses. As December approached, Briar Ridge slowly became the ranch people whispered about. Not because it was failing, because it wasn't. Smoke rose from repaired chimneys. The cattle looked healthier. Fresh fencing appeared where broken rails had stood for years. Neighbors noticed wagons arriving with supplies purchased from money saved rather than borrowed. Some admired it. Others became suspicious. The loudest voice belonged to Blaine Reddick. His prosperous ranch bordered Briar Ridge to the west, and for nearly a year he had quietly expected to purchase Aloan's property after foreclosure. Now those plans were slipping away. One frosty afternoon he rode into the yard wearing an expensive wool coat and polished boots. He smiled politely. Mrs. Mercer. Aloan greeted him with courtesy. Mr. Reddick. His eyes drifted toward Gideon repairing a gate nearby. I see you've hired yourself a miracle worker. He offered help. Nothing's free. Gideon continued working without interrupting. Blaine stepped closer. I'll increase my offer. There isn't an offer. There should be. He lowered his voice. Sell now. You'll never survive another winter. Aloan answered calmly. We're surviving this one. He chuckled. No, you're surviving because of him. His eyes narrowed toward Gideon. And strangers always collect eventually. Without another word, Gideon walked over. What exactly do you think I'm collecting? Blaine folded his arms. Land. Marriage. Ownership. Gideon simply smiled. I already own enough saddles. The answer caught Blaine completely off guard. He turned his horse and rode away. But the damage had already begun. Within days the rumors spread across the valley. People whispered in the general store, at church, at livestock auctions. Some claimed Gideon planned to marry the widow simply to inherit Briar Ridge. Others insisted he had failed elsewhere and was looking for another ranch to control. Tamsin overheard 2 women discussing it in town. Linnea heard cowboys laughing outside the blacksmith shop. Neither repeated the gossip at home. They didn't need to. Gideon already knew. One evening, after everyone had gone to bed, Aloan found him quietly saddling his horse beneath the barn lantern. She stopped. What are you doing? Tightening the cinch. It's midnight. I'll leave before sunrise. She stared at him. Why? The rumors. They'll fade. They'll hurt your family first. He continued fastening his saddlebags. If my staying gives people another excuse to question your reputation, then I've stayed too long. Aloan stepped closer. You really think that's what matters? He didn't answer. She gently took the saddle blanket from his hands. When my husband died, the house became quiet. She swallowed. So quiet it frightened me. My daughters smiled less every month. I forgot what laughter sounded like. She looked directly into his eyes. Now supper lasts 2 hours. Tamsin talks about business instead of debt. Linnea sings again while she works. She paused. For the first time since I buried my husband, this ranch feels alive. The barn remained silent except for the horses shifting inside their stalls. Finally, she placed the folded saddle blanket back onto the rail. If you leave because strangers enjoy talking, you'll prove they matter more than the people standing beside you. Gideon looked toward the warm light glowing from the ranch house windows. Then back at Aloan. Slowly, he untied his saddlebags. Without another word, he carried them back inside the tack room. Outside, snow continued falling across Briar Ridge. Inside, something far stronger than rumor had quietly taken root. Not love. Not yet. Something steadier. Trust. And neither of them realized that trust would soon face its greatest test before winter finally released the valley. January arrived with a storm unlike anything Briar Ridge had seen in over a decade. The wind howled across the valley before dawn, rattling every shutter on the ranch house. Snow fell sideways, swallowing fences, trails, and landmarks until the entire countryside became a sea of white. Eloan woke to the sound of the front door opening. She hurried downstairs to find Gideon already fastening his heavy winter coat. "The north pasture," he said calmly. "This storm is shifting. We need the herd moved before the drifts trap them. I'll wake everyone." Within minutes, the household was moving with practiced purpose. Tamsin gathered lanterns and checked supplies. Linnea saddled the strongest ranch horses. Eloan packed hot coffee, blankets, and food into saddlebags. No one panicked. Gideon had spent weeks preparing them for moments exactly like this. Outside, the wind nearly stole their breath. Visibility stretched no farther than 20 feet. Yet Gideon seemed to know every rise and hollow of the ranch by instinct. He divided the work without raising his voice. "Tamsin, stay with the south gate. Linnea, circle behind the younger cattle. Eloan, keep the lanterns burning near the creek crossing." "And you?" Eloan asked. He smiled beneath the snow collecting on his beard. "I'll bring the strays home." For nearly 6 hours they battled the storm. When frightened cattle scattered, Gideon calmly redirected them. When an old fence collapsed beneath heavy snow, Tamsin organized a temporary barrier exactly as Gideon had taught her. When 2 horses became trapped near the creek bank, Linnea remembered Gideon's lessons about patience instead of force, coaxing them safely back to higher ground. By sunset, the storm finally eased. Every member of the family returned exhausted. Every horse returned safely. Every head of cattle had survived. Word spread quickly through neighboring ranches. Several families had lost livestock. One ranch had nearly lost its entire herd. Yet Briar Ridge had come through untouched. Old rancher Abner Whitlock shook Gideon's hand the following day. "I've worked cattle 40 years. I've never seen anyone prepare a family the way you prepared yours." Gideon simply answered. "They prepared themselves." Winter slowly loosened its grip. By late February, patches of green began appearing beneath the melting snow. For the first time in nearly 2 years, Briar Ridge looked hopeful instead of weary. The repaired fences stood firm. The barns remained full. The cattle were healthy. Even the orchard Gideon had insisted on pruning showed signs of new growth. One chilly morning, a wagon bearing the bank's crest rolled into the yard. Eloan's stomach tightened. "The banker." Tamsin quietly squeezed her mother's hand. "We're ready." Mr. Hollister stepped down carrying a leather folder. Unlike his previous visits, he wasn't accompanied by legal notices. Instead, he spent nearly an hour walking the ranch. He inspected the cattle, the hay stores, the repaired irrigation channels, the barns, the books Tamsin had reorganized. When he finally returned to the porch, he closed the folder with a smile. "I came expecting foreclosure paperwork." Everyone remained silent. He continued. "Instead, I'm approving a complete restructuring." Eloan blinked. "What?" "The ranch is profitable again. The bank doesn't seize successful businesses." For several seconds no one spoke. Then Linnea laughed. It began softly. Soon Tamsin joined her. Eloan covered her face as tears slipped down her cheeks. Months of fear disappeared in one overwhelming moment. They had done it. Briar Ridge belonged to them. Not everyone celebrated. Across the valley, Blaine Reddick watched another opportunity disappear. His plan to purchase Briar Ridge had quietly failed. He rode to the ranch one final time. "I suppose congratulations are in order." Eloan smiled politely. "Thank you." He looked toward Gideon. "I misjudged you. I thought you'd eventually ask for ownership." Gideon shook his head. "I already told you. I never came for land." Blaine tipped his hat. Then, without another word, he turned his horse and disappeared down the snowy road. The rumors vanished with him. Early March arrived carrying warmer winds. The streams flowed freely again. Wildflowers began pushing through thawing earth. One sunrise, Gideon quietly packed his saddlebags. He brushed his smoke gray gelding before tightening the saddle. No announcement. No farewell. That was simply his way. He had fulfilled every promise. The ranch no longer needed saving. As he led the horse toward the gate, Tamsin stepped onto the porch. "Leaving?" He nodded. "My work's finished." Linnea joined her sister. You promised we'd always have a future. I did. We have one now. He smiled. Then I kept my word. He reached for the reins. Before he could mount, another voice stopped him. Not entirely. Aloan walked slowly across the yard. Morning sunlight warmed the snow melting around the porch steps. She stopped only a few feet away. When you arrived, I thought you were saving fences. She smiled gently. Then I thought you were saving cattle. She shook her head. I was wrong. Gideon remained silent. You saved something far more valuable. She looked toward her daughters standing together on the porch. They laugh again. They dream again. They stopped planning how to leave. They finally believe this ranch still has a future. Her eyes returned to his. You gave my daughters a home. He answered quietly. They already had one. No, they had a house. You gave them confidence that it would always remain theirs. For the first time since arriving at Briar Ridge, Gideon looked unable to find words. Aloan smiled. And somewhere between the first snowfall and the first signs of spring, I realized something. He waited. I don't need someone to save my ranch anymore. She stepped closer. I only need you. The valley became wonderfully quiet. Even the breeze seemed to pause. Gideon slowly removed his gloves. Instead of speaking, he gently took her hand. I've spent most of my life riding away, he admitted. I never expected to find a place worth staying. Aloan's eyes glistened. You already have. Behind them, Tamsin quietly slipped her arm around Linnea's shoulders. Neither sister interrupted. Some moments deserved silence. The following winter looked nothing like the last. Briar Ridge Ranch bustled with life. Healthy cattle filled the pastures. Neighbors gathered for a harvest supper inside the restored barn. Tamsin had become one of the valley's most respected ranch accountants, helping neighboring families strengthen their businesses. Linnea's horse training program had earned such praise that ranchers traveled from neighboring counties to seek her advice. Inside the ranch house, music drifted through open windows. Laughter echoed across the yard. Near sunset, Gideon and Aloan stood together on the porch watching fresh snow settle over the fields. It no longer felt threatening. It felt beautiful. Aloan slipped her hand into his. Funny. What is? I thought I was bargaining for survival. Gideon smiled. And what did you receive instead? She looked toward the warm windows where her daughters laughed with friends around the supper table. Then she looked back at the man who had quietly rebuilt everything she feared was lost. A future. She squeezed his hand gently. And the only home my heart was still searching for. As golden lights spilled across Briar Ridge Ranch, the first snow of another winter settled over a family no longer held together by necessity alone, but by trust, quiet devotion, and a love that had been earned one faithful day at a time. The bargain that began with saving a ranch had become something far richer. A home where every heart finally belonged.